My own daughter took my villa and gave it to her husband's family. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "It's theirs now. You are not allowed to come." I just smiled and nodded. I didn't say a word, not because I was powerless, but because I was planning something they would never see coming. My name is Richard, and I want to tell you how my daughter's betrayal turned into the most unforgettable lesson for her and her in-laws. It all started a few years ago when I decided to buy a beautiful villa in the suburbs, a place where I imagined spending my golden years, enjoying quiet mornings, and maybe inviting my children and grandchildren over for Sunday brunch. I worked hard for this house. Every brick, every corner of that home had my sweat, my sacrifices, my dreams. And I thought my family understood that. I thought they appreciated it, but life has a way of revealing true colors. My daughter, Emily, had married a man named Jason. From the beginning, I sensed that Jason was ambitious, but also a little entitled. Someone who thought the world owed him more than he had earned. I tried to welcome him, tried to see the good, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't realize how far it would go. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Emily called me. Her voice, which I had always associated with warmth, now sounded cold, almost rehearsed. "Dad," she said, "I've made a decision about the villa." My heart sank, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What decision?" I asked. Her words cut deeper than any blade could. "It's no longer yours to worry about. I've given it to my in-laws. They'll be moving in next week. You're not allowed to come." I didn't respond immediately. I could feel anger boiling, but I swallowed it. I nodded silently because I knew losing my temper would only give them a false sense of victory. Instead, I started planning a surprise they would never forget. You see, when someone underestimates you, when they think they've outsmarted you, that's when the real power comes into play. And I was about to show Emily and Jason, in a way they would never expect, exactly who they were dealing with. After that call, I spent hours walking through the villa, touching the walls, remembering every moment I had spent there. Each room had a story: laughter, holidays, family dinners, even quiet nights where I'd sit by the window and watch the sunset. And now, strangers, my own daughter's new family, would walk through those same halls as if they had earned it. I clenched my fists, but reminded myself, patience, that was my weapon. I began observing Emily and Jason, listening carefully to every careless word they spoke about the villa. They bragged to friends, flaunted plans about renovations, and even mentioned buying expensive furniture for their new home. They believed they had one. They believed I had no control anymore, and that confidence, that arrogance, became the perfect opening for what I had in mind. I started making subtle preparations. Nothing overt, nothing illegal, just small adjustments that would give me the upper hand. I researched every detail of the villa: entrances, security systems, old wiring, even the garden paths. Everything had a hidden layer, and I intended to use it to my advantage. Meanwhile, I had to play the part of the hurt, resigned father. Whenever Emily or Jason called, I kept my tone calm, almost warm, giving no hint that I was planning anything. I laughed politely when Emily gloated. I nodded when Jason bragged about their soon-to-be life there. If they thought they had humiliated me, that only made me stronger. Then came the week of their move-in. The day they arrived, moving trucks lined the driveway, and the in-laws were already buzzing with excitement, planning where each piece of furniture would go. Emily waved at me with that smug smile, thinking I would leave quietly. I returned the smile, calm, collected, and completely unreadable. I welcomed them as politely as ever, saying, "I hope you enjoy it." Little did they know, the villa had already been set up to reveal secrets they wouldn't forget. I had spent nights preparing small surprises in every corner, not dangerous, but enough to make them realize that taking what wasn't theirs came with consequences. Hidden cameras weren't necessary. I wanted them to feel it firsthand, to experience the villa's history and my presence in subtle, unforgettable ways. By the time they opened the doors and started exploring, I let them roam freely, smiling quietly from the background. That's when the first signs of confusion appeared on Jason's face. A misplaced frame here, a subtle sound there, little details that didn't match the flashy image he had imagined. I didn't intervene, I just watched, letting the tension build naturally. Emily's confidence started to wobble. She tried to reassure her husband, but even she couldn't ignore the strange feeling creeping through the villa. I could see it in her eyes, the first cracks in her smug facade, and at that moment I realized something. Revenge wasn't about anger. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about patience, timing, and letting them see the consequences of their own choices. The moment they stepped into the living room, I let them settle in, chatting lightly as if nothing unusual was happening. But every detail had been planned. The furniture, the decorations, even the lighting subtle changes I'd made over the past few days, were designed to make them feel like they had stepped into a space that remembered me, not them. Jason, ever so confident, began walking through the rooms, measuring spaces for furniture, speaking loudly about where they would put this and that. That's when it started, the first accident, the sound of a floorboard creaking unusually beneath him. He froze, looking down, puzzled. I didn't say a word. He laughed nervously and moved on, thinking he had imagined it. Next, Emily noticed it. A photo frame tilted at an odd angle, the kind that someone familiar with the house would never leave that way. She reached to straighten it, and as she did, a small note fell out. She picked it up and read it silently. Some places remember who built them. Some choices have echoes. Her smile faltered. She looked at me, confused. I just nodded politely, keeping my tone light. I hope you like the place, I said. Jason scoffed, trying to brush it off, but the feeling of unease had started to spread. Every corner of the villa seemed different, familiar, yet altered. Little touches I had left behind, small reminders of family memories, made the in-laws stop in their tracks. A chair that had belonged to me, a garden ornament I had planted years ago, even a cup in the kitchen that still smelled faintly like my coffee. They had assumed it would be their home now, but the house refused to forget me. I led them to the dining room and smiled as they noticed the centerpiece on the table. A delicate arrangement of flowers, but hidden inside was another note. This table has seen laughter, tears, and promises kept. Treat it well, or it will remind you who it belongs to. Emily's eyes widened. Jason laughed nervously, clearly unsettled. Then came the garden. They had boasted about redesigning it, buying plants and decorations. As they stepped outside, the garden appeared perfectly maintained, but every path they walked on had subtle markers, little reminders of family history. Old footprints I had left in the soil during planting were still faintly visible, almost like the house itself was guiding them. By now, the tension had shifted. Emily was no longer in full control, and Jason was visibly uncomfortable. The in-laws, who had marched in thinking they were entitled to everything, were starting to sense the villa's resistance to them. It was subtle, psychological, but effective. They realized slowly that taking what wasn't theirs didn't come without consequences. And I hadn't even revealed the best part yet. That was coming. The moment that would ensure this lesson was unforgettable, the one that would leave them speechless, understanding finally that arrogance and greed could never replace respect and love. As the day went on, I let them explore, laughing politely at their chatter, all while quietly observing their reactions. They were starting to realize that the villa wasn't theirs in spirit. No matter what legal documents said, every step they took, every item they touched, seemed to whisper stories of the family who had built it. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I invited them to the main hall where the largest window overlooked the garden. "Come," I said, smiling warmly. "There's something I want you to see." They exchanged curious glances but followed, their excitement mixing with subtle apprehension. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key I had kept hidden. "This key opens a special room," I said. "It's a part of the villa that's been preserved exactly as it was when it first became our home." Emily laughed nervously. "Oh, Dad, you're kidding, right?" Jason smirked, thinking it was just another quirky tour. I unlocked the door, and their eyes went wide. Inside was a room filled with memories, photos, letters, mementos of our family over the years. Every corner told a story, every shelf carried a piece of our lives. They froze, seeing tangible proof of the history they thought they could overwrite. "This," I said calmly, "is why you cannot truly own this villa. A house is not just walls and furniture. It's the life lived inside it. It remembers those who built it, loved it, and cared for it. You may occupy it, but you can never erase the past." Emily's face turned pale. For the first time, she looked at me not as a father she could manipulate, but as a man who had quietly outsmarted her. Jason's arrogance had completely vanished. He was speechless. The in-laws exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that what they had expected to be a victory had turned into a lesson in humility. I smiled again, calmly closing the door behind me. "The villa is yours now, technically," I said. "But remember, respect the history, or the house will remind you every day that it belongs to those who honor it." From that day forward, Emily and Jason treated the villa differently. No more boasting, no more careless talk. Every step they took, every room they entered, carried the silent weight of the family who had built it. They had learned, perhaps for the first time, that taking something for granted and thinking power lies in entitlement always comes with consequences. I never needed to raise my voice. I never needed to fight. The villa itself, filled with the memories of love, sacrifice, and dedication, did the talking. And as I watched them settle in, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not revenge for the sake of pride, but justice that taught a lesson they would never forget. After that day, life around the villa changed in ways no one could have predicted. Emily and Jason, once so confident, now moved with caution, respect, and an awareness of the home they had taken for granted. I watched from a distance, sometimes joining them for meals or casual conversations, always maintaining that calm, composed exterior. But inside, I reflected on everything that had led us here, the years of sacrifice, the unspoken love, the quiet patience. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about causing pain. It wasn't about proving you were stronger. It was about teaching a lesson that could transform arrogance into humility, ignorance into understanding. And in that, I found a strange kind of peace. Emily never spoke openly about her betrayal again. She no longer tried to assert control over the villa or over me. Instead, she began asking questions, learning about the history of the home, the effort that went into building it, and the memories embedded in every corner. I could see her slowly understanding the weight of choices, the value of respect, and the meaning of family. Jason, too, changed. The arrogance that had once defined him was replaced with caution and, surprisingly, a kind of admiration. He never admitted it aloud, but I could see the shift in his behavior. The way he treated the villa, the way he spoke to me, and even the way he looked at Emily. He had learned that entitlement could never replace effort, and arrogance could never erase history. The in-laws, who had come with expectations of instant privilege, also learned their lesson. They treated the villa with respect, understanding that it was not merely a property, but a repository of love, hard work, and family history. Every visit, every conversation, reminded them subtly that they were guests in someone else's legacy, and that respect was the price of coexistence. As for me, I found a new sense of satisfaction. Watching them navigate their guilt, humility, and newfound awareness was far more rewarding than any confrontation could have been. I realized that patience was my greatest tool, and timing was everything. By allowing them to take what they wanted, then letting the villa itself reveal the consequences of their actions, I had delivered a lesson far stronger than any words could have. Sometimes, at night, I sit in the villa's quiet spaces, sipping coffee and watching the sunset, reflecting on how life teaches us lessons in the most unexpected ways. Betrayal may wound us, but it also gives us the opportunity to rise above, to plan wisely, and to teach without aggression. That day, my daughter and her husband learned humility, and I learned the power of measured patience. And that, my friends, is the truth about the villa. It was never about revenge in the ordinary sense. It was about respect, awareness, and understanding that the choices we make leave echoes that cannot be erased. Even when people think they've taken everything from us, life has a way of revealing the balance, often through patience, subtlety, and quiet strength. In the weeks that followed, I often wandered through the villa alone, retracing my steps from years past. Every corner held a memory: a birthday party in the living room, the laughter of Emily when she was a child chasing butterflies in the garden, quiet evenings by the fireplace where we shared stories and dreams. I realized that this house was more than just bricks and walls. It was a living record of our family's life, and that was something no one could ever truly take away. Emily would sometimes stop by, ostensibly to check on things, but I noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. The arrogance was gone. Instead of demanding or asserting, she asked questions, listened carefully, and even sought advice on how to care for the villa. Watching her, I felt a mixture of relief and quiet pride. She had finally begun to understand that actions carry consequences, and that entitlement without effort breeds nothing but disappointment. Jason, too, had transformed in ways that surprised me. Once loud and self-assured, he now moved cautiously through the rooms, pausing to notice details he had ignored before. A small scratch on the floorboard, a faded photograph, a hand-written note tucked behind a shelf, he noticed it all. He began to speak to me with respect, sometimes seeking my perspective on minor repairs or garden work. It was subtle but unmistakable. The arrogance that had threatened to consume him had been replaced with awareness and humility. There were moments of quiet humor, too. One afternoon, Emily accidentally knocked over a vase that had belonged to me. Her face went pale and she froze. I walked over slowly, smiling, and picked up the vase. "It's okay," I said gently. "But maybe next time, handle things a little more carefully. Memories are delicate, just like people." She laughed nervously, and for a moment I saw the little girl she used to be. A girl who had once run through the halls without a care in the world, now learning the weight of responsibility. The in-laws, who had once arrived with a sense of entitlement, now treated the villa with reverence. They spoke in hushed tones when they walked through the hallways, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the home. I could see that the villa had changed them, subtly but permanently. They had learned that you cannot simply take what isn't yours and expect to walk away without consequence. I often reflected on the lessons of patience and strategy. True revenge, I realized, is never about anger or shouting. It's about creating a situation where people confront their own choices. By letting Emily and Jason take what they thought they had earned, then allowing the villa itself to guide them to understanding, I had delivered a lesson far more powerful than confrontation ever could. Late at night, I sometimes imagine what would have happened if I had reacted differently, if I had argued, yelled, or tried to force them out immediately. I realize now that would have only satisfied my anger temporarily. The villa's subtle power, the patience I exercised, and the quiet lessons embedded in each room created a ripple effect. They had learned humility, respect, and caution not because I demanded it, but because life, through the house itself, taught them. Sometimes, When I walk past the garden, I see Emily kneeling to tend to a flower bed, her hands careful and deliberate. Jason occasionally joins her, helping without complaint, noticing small details he would have overlooked before. The in-laws sit quietly on the veranda, appreciating the home in ways they never thought possible. It's a living lesson, unfolding in real time, and I watch it with quiet satisfaction. And through all of this, I discovered something about myself too. I learned that patience is a strength, observation is a weapon, and subtlety can achieve what anger never will. The villa had taught them a lesson, yes, but it had also reminded me of the power of measured action, of letting life itself orchestrate justice when needed. Sometimes late at night, I find myself sitting by the fireplace, staring into the flames and remembering the early days of Emily's childhood. I remember her tiny hands clutching mine as we walked through the villa for the first time, her laughter echoing through the empty halls as if the house itself had welcomed her. I think about those Sunday mornings when we'd bake together, flour dusting the countertops and her eyes sparkling with mischief. Every memory is etched into these walls, and I realized then why letting go of the villa would never truly mean letting go of me. Emily had always been headstrong even as a child. She wanted things her way, often ignoring guidance and sometimes even bending the rules to suit her desires. I loved her, of course, but I always hoped she would learn the value of patience and respect before life forced her to. It seems, unfortunately, that some lessons are best learned the hard way, or in my case, through the gentle but firm hand of experience. I remembered one afternoon years ago when she had tried to convince me to let her adopt a stray dog without consulting me. She was relentless, arguing, bargaining, and even threatening silent treatment, the weapon every parent dreads. I smiled, listened patiently, and finally let her have her way, but under certain conditions. She had learned to respect boundaries that day, and I realized that patience, coupled with quiet authority, often teaches more than anger ever could. Now, seeing her navigate the villa with Jason and the in-laws, I saw the same lessons unfold, only on a much larger scale. Every hesitation, every careful glance, every nervous laugh reflected the understanding she had yet to fully express. They were learning, slowly but undeniably, that entitlement has consequences. One afternoon, Jason called me over to show a supposedly renovated part of the garden. I walked over, nodding, and noticed immediately a subtle flaw he had overlooked, a small drainage problem that could cause the flowers to wither if ignored. I leaned in quietly and said, "A little attention here, and everything will flourish. Neglect it, and you'll see the consequences." He looked at me, startled, realizing I had anticipated his oversight. For the first time, he acknowledged the villa's true ownership, not in legal terms, but in respect, care, and understanding. Even the in-laws began to learn small lessons. They had entered with a sense of entitlement, expecting the villa to bend to their desires. Yet, day by day, they discovered that every corner had a story, every fixture a memory, and every misstep a gentle but undeniable reminder that this home belonged to those who nurtured it, not those who demanded it. I found myself smiling quietly at their subtle transformations. What started as a painful betrayal had evolved into a living classroom. They were learning humility, respect, and awareness not because I forced it, but because life, guided by the villa itself, orchestrated it beautifully. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped behind the trees and cast long shadows across the hallways, I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't require confrontation or anger. True power lies in patience, planning, and allowing life itself to deliver the lessons. The villa, with all its memories and subtle reminders, had become the perfect teacher. Sometimes I imagine Emily looking back years from now, realizing the depth of what she took for granted, and the lessons she learned through the quiet orchestration of consequences. That thought alone brings a sense of satisfaction far greater than any fleeting moment of anger ever could. Days turned into weeks, and the villa slowly became a place of quiet tension. Every morning I would walk through the rooms, checking on small things here and there, making sure the house remained as it had always been alive with memories, yet calm enough to test them. Patience, Emily and Jason moved about cautiously, sometimes exchanging whispered comments, as if the villa itself were listening. I recall one particular morning when Emily tried to reorganize the living room. She moved a small side table, thinking no one would notice. I didn't say anything at first, simply observing. Later that day, she discovered a handwritten note tucked beneath the table. Some things are not meant to be moved. Respect begins with small actions. Her eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on her that the villa was more than bricks and furniture. It was a living testament to care, effort, and history. Jason, meanwhile, had begun walking through the garden in silence, pausing at each flower bed as if expecting the plants themselves to speak. He had always dismissed the villa's past, focusing only on what he could claim as his. But now he noticed the subtle imperfections, the faint markings left by years of planting and care, and the little hidden details that reminded him of the home's true legacy. He didn't say much, but his silence carried more understanding than any words could. Even the in-laws, who had initially arrived with loud voices and high expectations, started to adopt a quieter, more respectful approach. They spoke in softer tones, treated the furniture with care, and occasionally glanced at me with subtle acknowledgement, as if realizing that the villa had claimed a quiet authority over them. It wasn't punishment, not exactly. It was something far more powerful, awareness. I began reflecting on my own journey through these days. Patience, I realized, had become my greatest strength. By allowing them to feel comfortable, then subtly confronting them with reminders of history and care, I had created a natural rhythm of understanding. They were learning without direct confrontation. Every misstep, every glance, every small surprise was a lesson in humility. There were moments of tension, too. Emily would sometimes snap at Jason when he overlooked a small detail or mismanaged a room. I would quietly watch, knowing that their disagreements stemmed from the villa itself teaching them respect and attention. It was subtle, psychological, and incredibly effective. I didn't need to intervene. I only needed to remain patient, letting life do its work. Sometimes I would catch Emily standing in a corner, holding an old family photo, her expression a mix of nostalgia and regret. I could almost hear her thoughts. I took this for granted. I didn't realize what it meant. And Jason, quietly observing the same photo from another angle, seemed to understand too the arrogance fading, replaced by awareness. I started documenting these moments in my own mind, reflecting on how subtlety and patience could achieve what confrontation never could. The villa had become more than a home. It was a teacher, a mirror, a guide. And I, in turn, had learned that true strength doesn't come from force, but from quiet, unwavering presence and strategic patience. Even small gestures mattered. One afternoon, I left a cup of coffee on the kitchen counter exactly where I used to leave it years ago. Emily noticed immediately, her eyes softening. Jason asked why it was there, and I replied simply, "Some habits carry meaning. Some actions remind us who we are and where we come from." They both paused, absorbing the subtle lesson without needing it spelled out. One afternoon, as I was walking through the villa's hallways, I overheard Emily arguing with Jason over where to place an old family rug. "Dad would never have put it here," she muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. Jason, already tense from the subtle reminders the house had been giving him, replied defensively, "It's our home now. Why does everything have to follow his rules?" I smiled quietly from the corner, letting them work it out themselves. I knew that every disagreement, every moment of hesitation, was a tiny victory for patience over arrogance. The villa itself had become a teacher, guiding them through lessons they hadn't wanted to learn but desperately needed. Later that day, I arranged a small surprise, something I knew would unsettle them without fear or danger. I had placed small, harmless reminders in rooms they frequented. A photograph slightly moved from its original spot, a note under a pillow, or a misplaced book on a shelf. Each one seemed innocent, yet carried the unmistakable mark of someone who knew the house intimately. Emily noticed the first one while tidying the guest room. A note slipped out from a drawer read, "History has a memory. Treat it with care, or it will remind you daily of who walked here before." Her hand trembled slightly as she read it, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of humility in her eyes. Jason, watching her reaction, couldn't hide the unease spreading across his face. Even the in-laws were starting to notice that the villa seemed different. Things they had assumed were simple, ordinary elements of the house now seemed meaningful, deliberate. A chair placed at a particular angle, a flower in full bloom that had been tended for years, a small ornament that held a memory of my family. All of it reminded them subtly that they had stepped into a space with history and care far beyond their understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the rooms, I invited them for tea in the living room. I spoke lightly, smiling, but every word carried weight. "I know you're settling in," I said softly. "But remember, homes are not just spaces. They're built with love, effort, and time. Treat it well, and it will treat you kindly. Ignore that, and it will always remind you of its past." Emily looked at me, her expression conflicted, part guilt, part understanding. Jason's posture stiffened, his confidence shaken. The in-laws nodded politely, clearly realizing that the villa was more than just property. It had become a living reminder of patience, history, and the consequences of entitlement. That night, I reflected on the unfolding changes. I realized that the villa had become a silent teacher, subtly guiding them to awareness. And I understood something profound about life. Revenge does not need to be loud, dramatic, or destructive. True impact comes from patience, observation, and allowing natural consequences to take shape. Over the next few days, the small surprises continued, each carefully planned to be harmless, yet impossible to ignore. A slightly ajar window, a misplaced vase, a note in a rarely used drawer, all acted as subtle reminders that the villa had a memory, and it was not easily forgotten. Emily and Jason began to move more carefully, speak more thoughtfully, and even consult me on decisions they once would have made impulsively. I watched them, sometimes from a distance, sometimes joining them quietly, and I felt a deep satisfaction. Not the satisfaction of vengeance, but of seeing awareness grow, humility take root, and respect blossom in unexpected ways. The villa had done what confrontation could not. It had taught, reminded, and reshaped. One morning, I decided it was time for the villa to deliver one last subtle reminder, a final layer of suspense before they fully understood the depth of what they had tried to claim. I left a small envelope on the kitchen counter, exactly where I had once placed Emily's childhood letters. It contained a simple note. Some lessons are learned slowly, but those learned this way stay forever. Respect is earned, not taken. Emily found it first. She held it in her hands, reading it over and over, her expression a mix of shame and realization. Jason glanced over her shoulder, and for the first time I saw genuine acknowledgement in his eyes. The arrogance that had driven him to claim the villa so quickly had faded entirely. Even the in-laws, observing from the living room, fell silent, sensing the weight of the message without me needing to say another word. That evening I gathered them for tea one last time. I spoke calmly, almost warmly, recounting small stories from the villa's past, moments of laughter, small victories, quiet hardships. Every anecdote subtly reminded them that this house had been built with love and effort, not entitlement. Emily's eyes softened as she listened. Jason leaned forward, paying close attention, and even the in-laws were attentive, realizing that the villa itself had shaped this conversation long before I spoke. By now, the subtle suspense had transformed into a profound emotional lesson. They were no longer the same people who had barged in, expecting everything to bend to their will. The villa had guided them, shaped them, and revealed their mistakes without force or anger. It had spoken in whispers, nudged in small ways, and left them with a truth they could not ignore. Respect cannot be stolen, and arrogance cannot erase history. Later, I walked through the villa alone, reflecting on the journey. I thought about the betrayal, the initial pain, the long days of planning and patience. I realized something deeply important. True strength does not lie in retaliation, but in understanding, foresight, and allowing life to teach lessons naturally. The villa, a silent witness to our family's history, had done exactly that. Sometimes Emily and Jason would approach me, asking questions about old photographs, the history of certain rooms, or stories behind small objects. Their curiosity was no longer tainted with entitlement. It was tinged with respect and genuine interest. They had learned humility in the most subtle way possible, and I could see the transformation clearly. The in-laws, too, had changed. They treated the villa with care, mindful of every detail, aware now that their presence was a privilege, not a right. They understood that a home carries the essence of those who built it, and that trying to override it would never succeed. And as I sat in the villa one quiet evening, sipping tea and watching the sun set over the garden, I felt a profound sense of closure. Betrayal had been transformed into understanding, arrogance had become humility, and patience, strategy, and subtle guidance had won where anger could not. I realized that this story, the villa, the surprises, the lessons, was not just about revenge. It was about wisdom, about seeing beyond immediate emotions, about teaching through life itself rather than confrontation. The villa had spoken, and they had listened. From that day forward, Emily and Jason never underestimated the importance of respect or the weight of history. And I, Richard, had discovered a deeper truth about myself, that true power lies not in taking action in anger, but in guiding patiently, subtly, and wisely. The villa remained standing, a living testament to patience, love, and the enduring lessons of life. And every time I walked through its halls, I smiled quietly, knowing that sometimes the quietest lessons are the most unforgettable. As the days went by, I often found myself walking through the villa in silence, revisiting corners that held memories long before Emily or Jason had even imagined moving in. I remembered the time Emily had tripped over the corner of the living room rug as a child, spilling her lemonade all over the floor. Instead of scolding her, I had laughed with her, cleaned up the mess, and made her feel safe. That same rug, now under Jason's cautious feet, carried echoes of those moments, and I smiled quietly at the thought that even small memories could leave a lasting impression. One evening, I watched Emily pacing near the fireplace, fidgeting with a small trinket I had left on the mantel. I could see the conflict in her eyes, part regret, part realization. She muttered to herself, "I didn't know, I never realized." Jason was nearby, attempting to hang a picture, but hesitated mid-action, glancing at me for approval, and then slowly stepping back, as if he had learned to respect the rules of this house without me needing to say a word. I often reflected on my own patience during these days. There were moments I felt anger bubbling inside me, memories of betrayal flashing in my mind, and yet I held it back. I reminded myself that every subtle move I made, every note left, every carefully timed surprise, every small anecdote shared, was shaping their awareness far more effectively than confrontation ever could. My internal monologue became a quiet meditation on strategy and foresight. Let them feel it. Let them see it for themselves. Let life itself teach the lesson. Even minor incidents became lessons. One morning, Emily tried to rearrange a vase of flowers in the hall without consulting me. As she reached to pick it up, a small envelope slipped from beneath it, revealing a note. Some arrangements are meant to remain. Changing them changes more than what you see. She paused, glancing at me with a mixture of surprise and understanding. Jason, observing her reaction, didn't speak, but the shift in his posture said everything I needed to know. They were beginning to internalize the lesson without resistance. The villa itself seemed to guide them now. Small creaks in the floorboards, subtle drafts in certain rooms, the gentle sway of trees casting shadows across the hallways. All of it reminded them that they were not merely guests, but participants in a living history they could not ignore. It was almost as if the house had its own voice, whispering lessons they were only beginning to comprehend. I found myself reflecting on the nature of life's lessons more broadly. Betrayal, I realized, is rarely simple. It cuts deep, yes, but it also offers an opportunity to teach, to guide, to demonstrate patience and wisdom. True power is not in retaliation or immediate satisfaction. It is in allowing events to unfold naturally, in observing quietly, and intervening only when necessary with subtle guidance. My internal monologue became a daily exercise in mindfulness, patience, and reflection on the human condition. There were also moments of unexpected humor. One afternoon, Jason tripped over the edge of a small rug I had left in a corner, a rug that had been in the family for decades. He fell with a surprised yelp, and Emily gasped, but I couldn't help but chuckle softly. The villa had a way of teaching even through minor accidents, reminding them that respect and attention to detail were essential. And in those quiet moments, I realized that the villa had become a mirror, not just for them, but for me as well. I had learned patience in ways I never expected. I had learned to channel anger into strategy, to convert betrayal into subtle teaching moments, and to find satisfaction in the transformation of others rather than immediate gratification. I often imagined future days, years from now, when Emily and Jason would walk through the villa and remember these lessons, the small notes, the misplaced objects, the subtle reminders. They would recall the quiet authority that patience holds, and perhaps they would even pass it on to their own children someday. In that thought, I found a deep, enduring sense of fulfillment. And so, as I sit here in the quiet of the villa, watching the sunset spill its golden light across the garden, I realize that this story, the villa, the surprises, the lessons, is more than just a tale of betrayal and revenge. It is a story about patience, wisdom, and the subtle power of life itself. It is about understanding that true strength does not come from anger or confrontation, but from observation, strategy, and allowing time to reveal the truth. Emily and Jason have changed. Their arrogance has been replaced with humility, their entitlement with awareness, and their impatience with respect. The villa has guided them without force, teaching them that some things cannot be taken. They must be honored, respected, and understood. Even the in-laws, once confident and loud, have learned the value of patience and awareness. As for me, Richard, I have discovered that revenge need not be loud, dramatic, or destructive. The quiet, measured actions, the small notes, subtle reminders, and gentle guidance have achieved what anger never could. I have learned that life itself can be the most powerful teacher when approached with patience, wisdom, and calm determination. Sometimes the greatest victories are the invisible ones, the lessons that leave no scars but teach more profoundly than any confrontation ever could. Watching them grow, change, and come to understand the weight of their choices has been the most satisfying experience of all. The villa, a silent witness to decades of life, has spoken in whispers, and they have finally listened. And so, my friends, if there is one truth to take from this story, it is this: patience is a weapon, wisdom is a shield, and subtlety is a force far stronger than anger. When life challenges us, when betrayal wounds us, we must remember that the quiet, measured response often carries the deepest impact. Respect, awareness, and humility are lessons that cannot be rushed. They must be felt, understood, and earned. The villa remains standing, a living testament to love, effort, and the enduring power of subtle justice. And as I walk through its halls, I smile quietly, knowing that sometimes the softest lessons leave the most unforgettable marks, and that those who fail to respect the past will eventually understand, in their own time, the true cost of arrogance and entitlement.